Hi guys, so I'm fascinated to know why people voted for Brexit, both politicians and members of the public. Now, on the right, it's quite simple, I believe. It generally comes down to immigration, be it racism or general xenophobia. And, people may disagree with me on that, but when you ask enough questions and you've scratched enough at the surface, and these people who are responding to you on the right, they've painted themselves into that little corner that's left, it generally is one that comes down to general xenophobia or racism in particular. Now, on the left, I think it's more interesting because generally the left are not racist, so that we can't really use that argument. So instead, I wanted to know why people on the left voted for Brexit. Now, Owen Jones claims to be a Eurosceptic. Claire Fox definitely is one because she was a member of the Radical Communist Party, and then she eventually became an MEP for the Brexit Party. Now, this interview is 1 hour long. I'm not going to cover even half of that. I will leave a link in the description. You can watch it yourself. I was foaming at the mouth watching this or listening to this interview. I'm going to cover some of it, and I'm going to be shouting probably a lot. So settle in, get something nice and warm to drink because this is going to take some time. So we're going to hear why Claire Fox supports Brexit in a sense.
But in terms of you, what I'm interested in is what does Brexit mean? What is for you the purpose of Brexit, if you like, rather than not as an abstraction, but as a concrete political project? What does it mean to you?
So I think originally, when the referendum was called, it was a fairly traditional case of Euroscepticism, for want of a better way of explaining it, in the Tony Benn sense. And I think that what happened was that in the course of the referendum build-up, it became clear to me that so many, which I saw as, by the way, the kind of growing support for leaving the European Union was a bit like a kind of popular anti-globalism movement. If you'd had the Occupy movement at St. Paul's full of students, this was a kind of working class version of it, or not just working class, but there was a lot of that around. People were reacting against that, and the sense of what sovereignty meant did begin to have some purchase, and I do think that's why Take Back Control mattered. But what transformed it and what radicalized the whole thing was the inability of the establishment to accept that vote and the way they turned on the election.
Okay, but the inability to recognize the vote or accept the vote came after the vote. How is that a motivation for Brexit? Now, she talked about globalization and things like that, but I think most of the people who voted were angry with the establishment in the UK. Now, I've said this before on the channel, many politicians, and not just in the UK, it's all over Europe, politicians will never say, I was wrong. They'll never say, I'm sorry, or generally they won't do that. It's very difficult to find politicians who say that they were wrong. But they're very quick to blame other people, and it's very easy to blame the European Union. The UK government were doing it all the time. There's an immigration problem, it's the EU's fault. Not that we are in control of this. Economic crisis, it's the EU's fault. It's very easy for politicians to redirect blame to someone who can't actually respond, because the EU doesn't get involved in internal politics and say, actually, no, that's not true. We're not responsible for that. So it's very easy for corrupt, incompetent, inept politicians to shift the blame to someone else. And of course, they don't have anyone responding, and they also have the power of the media behind them, because the media will, of course, fall in line and say, yes, it's the EU's fault. So if you have a public who's been told constantly that by their government, that the government is not making mistakes, and if there are mistakes, it's because of the EU, and you have the media backing that up, well, then, of course, many people will believe, well, we should stop this.
Lecture afterwards, they tried to disparage them. You did have the demonization and delegitimization of millions of people, phrases like gammon, the calling of people as racist or stupid or misinformed, or
Okay, there's so much to break down here. So these are arguments made by Remainers. These are comments made by Remainers about people who voted for Brexit. They didn't know what they were voting for. But they didn't know what they were voting for. I did a video recently where Daniel Hannan said that it was impossible to imagine leaving the single market. That was a politician. Digby Jones was saying, there's no way that the UK would get a bad deal because the German car industry would put pressure on Angela Merkel to put pressure on the EU to give the UK a good deal. Now, these are politicians. Politicians who are paid tens of thousands of pounds a year, 70, 80, 90,000 pounds a year, to be informed about complex arguments, complex issues. And they were wrong. Not wrong by opinion, they were there's no argument here, they were wrong. How Daniel Hannan can say that no one was talking about leaving the single market, and now the UK is outside the single market. Now, if politicians who are paid a huge amount of money and are surrounded by advisors and experts didn't understand, then how can you say that the public understood? Now, the idea of calling people gammons and stuff like that, the Remainers are angry. And they were angry. Because they had something taken away from them. Freedom of movement, for example. A lot of young people who voted to remain did so because they enjoyed freedom of movement. They understood that if this is taken away from us, we won't be able to go and live in France or Germany or Spain or in Italy to improve our language skills, to improve our career prospects. Well, we can if we have lots of money. So you had people like Claire Fox, who's financially protected, making decisions for people who are not, and claiming that she was fighting for them, taking away privileges that they had and trying to tell them, well, this is part of a bigger picture.
Taken in by Russian algorithms or adverts, all of these different things basically said to people, you did not make that decision in an informed way. And one of the things that was fascinating for me, and what you say, what does Brexit mean? I mean, Brexit's not a destination. It was simply the removal of one barrier of democratic accountability from the British people.
Okay, I told you I'd be foaming at the mouth here. Claire Fox was elected to the European Parliament using proportional representation. If Claire Fox had run as a member of the Brexit Party for the general election in the UK, she wouldn't have gotten in. So she's talking about protecting democracy, where in a system that would not allow her to be democratically elected. While at the same time she's criticizing a system, an institution that allowed her to be democratically elected. I've talked about this before, and I think the fundamental problem on the left when it comes to Brexit is that they lived in a delusion. The left-wing Brexiteers are living in a fantasy world. While the right wing voted because they wanted to stop immigration, the left believed that Brexit was a stepping stone to a socialist utopia. And you can see this when, in the way Jeremy Corbyn was dealing with Brexit. It was an annoyance, a nuisance, a distraction. It's just a stepping stone. It's something we just need to get over, and then we will get to a utopia, a socialist utopia. But how did Brexit actually... What is the result of Brexit from a democratic point of view? Boris Johnson has an 80-seat majority. We're talking about protecting statues over protecting people's lives. The Conservative Party are even stronger. They have decided we're going to put our people in charge of the BBC. If Brexit had not happened, we wouldn't be facing that scenario. And just to talk about the rights, talking about rights, the European Union's protections for workers are going to be completely stripped away now because of the Conservatives are in power. And Claire Fox supported that. She wanted that. She wanted Brexit. But I think people like her on the left are in a comfortable position, financially protected, that she has this idea that, well, any suffering that takes place because of Brexit is sort of justified, or it's okay because we're going to get to something better later on. Maybe it's the Trotsky in her. You know, the revolution never ends. I don't believe me. I understand the irony of me, you know, using this name on this channel. Maybe I should stop using this name. But Claire Fox is in a comfortable position, and she's basically, through this interview, and I do recommend watching all of it. It is quite long, but I do recommend watching it. It's basically saying suffering is justified because we're going to get something better. So people who have been laid off because of Brexit, that's okay. People who have been offloaded, pushed into a right-wing universal credit is okay because something better will eventually come along. Proportional representation is more democratic than first past the post, but we can't we can't change that at the moment because Boris Johnson's in charge.
Right? Or the voters in the UK could now hold their own politicians to account. So it didn't.
I'm sorry to be interrupting every few seconds. Hold your own politicians to account. In a proportional representation system, you could have. In first past the post, you can't. Is Boris Johnson being held to account? Boris Johnson, on the back of Brexit, got an 80-seat majority. How is that being held to account? How is Boris Johnson being held to account even in Parliament itself? He lies on a continuous basis. Every parliamentary session, he lies after lies, and he's not held to account. How is that democratic? How is that taking back control?
Didn't think it was going to lead to sunny uplands by any stretch. It just wasn't going to be as scary as people had said. It did represent a desire for change, for social change, because people had felt that they'd been done to, I think. And one of the things that maybe would help the people watching is one of the things I've been most concerned about over the last decade or so is the assault on agency, on the idea of people having control over their own lives, their own self-determination, if you want. And so,
what control do people have over their lives today? Can you challenge the government? No. People can protest in the streets, but it doesn't make any difference. The government don't listen to it. The nurses at the moment are talking about taking strike action, but the government and their backers in the media will stop this. So how did Brexit help ordinary people?
So the fight for Brexit became a fight both for popular sovereignty, that the parliamentary sovereignty, the parliament wouldn't have the opportunity to stand in the way of popular sovereign decision, as in through the referendum, but also people's sense of themselves, the fact that they felt that they had taken control, won a vote which they weren't expecting, that they would retain that and not feel that they'd been screwed over and lost. And do you know what it reminded me of, which people think this is funny, is it reminded me, and a lot of the Brexit stalls I did, and a lot of the people who got active during Brexit, because a lot of them were women, they reminded me of the miners' wives that had emerged during the miners' strike, which I was involved in, the miners' wives groups.
Don't worry, I'm still here. People, the working class, the poor and the working class are at the sharp edge of Brexit. If you don't believe me, look at the data itself. Look at the number of companies who are laying off staff because of Brexit. Costs are going up. The cost of products that are going to be imported, that are being imported at the moment, are going to become more expensive because of Brexit. Like Claire Fox, I don't know how much money she has in the bank, but I'm sure she's quite protected from any cost, any inflation, or any cost to increased cost to the price of living because of Brexit. The people at the bottom know. People were convinced that they had some sort of power, and it was a lie. And the last 2 years have demonstrated that. What power do the working class have today? How has Brexit empowered them in any way? It's convinced some people that they have power, but they have no power. Boris Johnson is in power. Boris Johnson has the power. The Conservative Party have the power. The people backing the Conservative Party have the power. The working class have no power.
People who had not otherwise seen themselves as political activists, but got a taste for changing history and fighting for their rights and fighting for their defence and so on. And
they fought to take away their own rights. They had the right of freedom of movement. They could have... I'm not saying freedom of movement is for everyone. It's probably more beneficial perhaps to the middle class than the working class. But perhaps somebody who's working class could eventually become middle class and they would benefit from it as well. But that's something you decided to take away. How is that? You convinced working class people that their enemy is students who want to travel around the world, who want to visit Europe and work in Europe and eventually settle down there. Those people are the problem. We need to take away their rights. Then we'll be better off. We need to stop... I know this isn't an argument on the left, but we need to stop poor people from coming into the country because they're stealing our jobs. The media, the right-wing media, the billionaires are telling you that other poor people are the problem. The billionaires are telling you that, young middle-class people who want to travel around Europe are the problem. We need to stop all of this. And Claire Fox voted for this, campaigned for it.
Became politicised. They started to read more, they started to think more, and saw that they were not just people who were passively observing, but people who could shape things. And that's what the whole Brexit thing meant to me. And that was what I was determined that would not be overturned. It's not, God knows, you can see from now, it doesn't guarantee anything. It never did. But even...
What was the point of it? What was the point in making people poorer? What have you won? Unfortunately, in this interview, I haven't watched it all because it has been extremely difficult to watch it all. But up to this stage, I haven't heard her actually demonstrate a benefit of Brexit. She talks about us, people wanting to take back control. We want to be more free and stuff. But she hasn't actually presented a tangible benefit. You can't say this is something that we have that we didn't have before. Because if she's talking about, holding the government to account, well, that's false. If she's talking about more democracy, well, the first past the post system is extremely undemocratic. Support for the Tories went down, but they increased their number of seats in Parliament. How is that democratic? How is it democratic that the Green Party received the same number of votes as the SNP? And I'm not attacking the SNP, I'm attacking the system. How is it possible that the Green Party received the same number of votes as the SNP and they have one seat in Parliament? How is that democratic? You have somebody who was sitting in the European Parliament because of proportional representation, and she's criticizing that actual institution, saying that we wanted to take back control so we could have more something.
Even the fact that it wasn't shafted meant that people would not lose the confidence that they had gained from winning the referendums.
I mean, one of that, because as you say, I grew up in Stockport, and the ward in Stockport I grew up in voted to leave the European Union, and people I knew who grew up with voted to leave, though I should say more so their parents and grandparents, because when we talk about class, it depends how you define class, but if you're using the pollster's definition, which I find very problematic, most working class people under 35 voted to remain, most middle class people over 65 voted to leave. So it's complicated. Unless we airbrush out people who live in Hackney who grew up in poverty voted for Remain, and also we raise people in some prosperous parts of the shires which voted to leave. It's not clear cut. But the point, I suppose, what I'd ask is, a lot of the people I grew up with had very difficult lives. So they often couldn't get affordable housing because the government wouldn't build the housing they needed. Council housing got flogged off and not replaced. Their wages had been stagnating, partly because the unions had been smashed, partly because of austerity. They couldn't get secure jobs. Those jobs had disappeared in the 80s and 70s and often replaced with precarious work in the service sector. What I'm trying to say is a lot of these problems were very real and deep and profound, but they were to do with the economic system. But a lot of people felt that they were to do with mass immigration. I mean, I know that because I'm talking about people I grew up with.
And it's nothing to do with the EU.
Or the European Union. And isn't the danger, without going into that debate about, I'm not trying to go into Marxist false consciousness parodying here, but that Brexit won't solve those problems, and therefore a lot of the anger and alienation people felt will end up feeling like betrayal, because a lot of people did vote. They definitely did. I interviewed them. I spoke to them. They voted to Brexit because they thought it would materially improve their lives and deal with some of the...
I'm sure that you talked to just as many people as I did, but the one thing that I thought that the left got absolutely wrong in the whole Brexit vote was they thought it was something to do with improving people's lives materially.
So if it doesn't improve... Oh my God, this is really frustrating. So you want people to vote for something that's not going to improve their lives. Like she's saying materially. But if it doesn't improve their lives, then how would it improve? This is part, and this really frustrates me because she's sitting in a position of privilege and she's telling people, look, your life may get worse, but don't worry, there's some, greater goal at the end of it. And this is what also frustrated me about Jeremy Corbyn and how he viewed Brexit as a distraction, as an irritation. Don't worry, once we get over Brexit, then we'll create this socialist utopia. That's what we need to do. Just get Brexit done and then we can have our socialist utopia. Well, the current state of affairs doesn't seem to be very socialist utopian, does it? Boris Johnson, an 80-seat majority. The media in his back pocket. The Labour Party way down. The Labour Party down in the polls after 130,000 people have died. And Brexit has resulted in a disaster.
Really, and I don't think it was. And I don't think that's why people voted to leave. That doesn't mean to say that years of putting up with, as you say, precarious working conditions or not having enough wouldn't affect the way people saw things. But you said, and they blame mass immigration. As I say, I don't think that was necessarily the case. That wasn't the debates that I had. I'm not trying to pretend that there was no one who said that to me. That would be ridiculous. But immigration became a flashpoint because free movement from the European Union was seen as something that you were not allowed to challenge, you're not allowed to debate, you weren't allowed to vote on it. And you were.
Free movement. Notice how the Brexiteers, and even she's a Brexiteer, she's on the left, I think. She claims to be on the left. I think she sounds right-wing, but anyway, she claims to be on the left. Freedom of movement is bad when it's coming into the UK. But they never mention about freedom of movement going out. So they never mention about how freedom of movement is actually good for British people because they can travel around Europe freely. They can live, work, stay, do whatever the hell they want around Europe without restrictions. Look, you can still do it, but you need more money. But there were fewer restrictions. That's the freedom part of it. But they focus on freedom of movement is bad. Look at all these quote-unquote horrible immigrants coming in. That's the right-wing position. The left-wing position is more like, well, if all these, this is part of globalization and all these immigrants are coming in. We've nothing against the immigrants themselves, but they're undermining the system. They're part of an attempt to undermine the system, and the capitalists are profiting from this. So if we stop freedom of movement, we're going to protect ourselves from capitalism or something like that.
Weren't, because it was from on high. So I think that emphasising the economic issues in the way that you've just done, as to explain as to what people did, misunderstand something, which is people wanted themselves to be taken seriously as part of the discussion. They wanted to be able to, and I think there's a kind of danger of a kind of condescension here, because people might want, when they're poor, might want more money, but they mainly wanted more control, which is why the control thing happened, which is...
Control of what? Do they have control? You got your Brexit. How are poor people, how are the working class more in control now? What do they control? You lied to these people. You told them, I'm going to give you control. You didn't tell them what that control was. And now you're saying they wanted more control, so we gave them more control. Control of what? How? Tell me. And of course she can't hear. Claire Fox. Tell me, Claire Fox, what could you not do before Brexit that you can do now? What can poor people, the working class that you claim to defend and protect, what can they do now that they couldn't do before? I'd love to hear a response from that. Obviously I won't. I'll try and contact her on Twitter. What can the working class do now that they couldn't do before? If it's not about money.
People need to feel that they matter.
People need to feel. There we have it. The crux of the problem. Feel. Feelings. I have to feel that I have power. Not actually have power. I have to feel that I'm in control. Not that I actually am in control. And this falls back once again to this utopian idea. The idea that on the right they wanted to stop immigration. On the left it seems to be we want to feel that we're moving towards our utopia, our socialist utopia. Doesn't matter if we are or not. Doesn't matter if we see Boris Johnson win an 80-seat majority because of the step taken towards this utopia. The decisions to move towards the utopia are not actually driven by people at the bottom. It's driven by people at the top of this pyramid, in a sense. And Claire Fox is at the top of that pyramid. She's in a comfortable position. She's telling poor people, you need to vote against your own interests. I know it sounds pretty bad, and it's going to be bad for a period, but don't worry, we're going to get something better after. And don't worry if Boris Johnson gets an 80-seat majority. Don't worry if you're stuck on universal credit until you're almost dead. Something better will come along. I promise. Believe me. I have a feeling.
And, it's not just a PR stunt. They voted a particular way and then they were told they didn't matter. So that was particularly irritating. But the other thing that you're saying is that...
They were not told that they didn't matter. They voted for something they didn't understand. Then it was presented, okay, what do we do now that we have this vote? How do we implement it? But there was no instructions. Nigel Farage never handed over an instruction manual to the UK government and said, this is how you're going to get Brexit implemented. People were sold a unicorn. And then when they opened the box and they found no unicorn, they were like, why isn't there a unicorn? It was, they don't actually exist. What? How dare you insult me by saying that unicorns don't exist? I used the old pizza analogy. And some people like it, some people don't. I say, bring me a pizza. And I don't tell you what type of pizza. Whether it's a frozen pizza, fresh pizza, pizza with pineapple, a picture of a pizza. But whatever you bring back, I complain because that's not the one I ordered. Brexit was the same thing. People were told we're leaving the European Union. That's all you have to vote for. There was no mention about what comes after. These people were very good at selling this idea. All you need to do is vote to leave. Don't worry, it will sort itself out after. Anyone who tells you it's complicated is part of Project Fear. They're trying to undermine your vote.
I don't think that people voted Brexit thinking that it would solve all their problems. I mean...
It was sold as solving all your problems. How dare you lie here? She was a member of the Brexit Party, okay? So I'm going to refer to her boss. If she wasn't part of the Brexit Party, I wasn't going to refer to Nigel Farage. But on every occasion, the NHS doesn't have enough funding, leave the EU. We get more funding. Workers can't have to wear extra protection. We have to wear a hard hat. That's nothing to do with the EU, not directly relate to the EU. Leave the EU, then workers will be able to do whatever they want. We are forced to eat this type of food because of the EU. We can't trade without the rest of the world because of the EU. All of it lies. Complete and utter lies. But it was sold to people. It was sold as the solution to all of their problems. You can't get a medical appointment, blame the EU. You can't park your car where you want, blame the EU. You want to get a bigger vacuum cleaner, blame the EU. All of it was lies, and it was always about blaming someone else. And it was convenient, because it required people not to think. Many people don't have time to think. Many people who are working 3 or 4 jobs, they don't have the time to sit down and research whether a particular politician is telling them the truth or not. I generally take the position of when a politician is telling you something, it's probably a lie. Better look to the experts. But I understand many people don't have the time to do that.
That's what the only people who ever say that to me are not Brexit voters. The thing is, I don't know where that came from. Oh, we'll vote Brexit and everything will be great. We won't have austerity.
Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and all of these people were saying it will fix all the problems. It was not Remainers. How would Remainers be saying that? Remainers were not saying, Brexiteers are saying if you vote for the... No, but it's true. It was the people, Brexiteers were saying, you have to vote for... We want to sell more fish. We get out of the EU. We want to have fewer people in the waiting on NHS lists. Get out of the EU. The Brexiteers sold this as the silver bullet.
Anymore. I don't think they blamed the EU for all their problems, but the EU was a barrier to resolving the problems they had because...
Okay, let's hear how the EU was stopping working class people from having something great.
It is and was a barrier to resolving those problems because it got in the way. Now, the one thing that
for example,
that if you would like, I completely disagree with Nigel Farage on is I don't think Brexit is a foreign imposition. I don't think the EU rather was a foreign imposition. The British ruling class actually willingly were part of the European Union. It's far suited them to be able to win arguments at the European Commission level for policies, which they then didn't have to get past the kind of rather awkward squad of the British electorate. They were able to go there, bring back policies and say, as a fait accompli. So
why was that possible? I disagree with her that it was the British elite doing this. Unless you call politicians elite, I don't know. She was a politician, so I imagine she'd include herself in that. I just explained it. The European Parliament, I'm sorry to say, is more democratic than the British Parliament because of proportional representation. They were able to get policies. Yes, great. They were able to get policies. And there was consensus. In the UK Parliament, it's basically a one-party state every 4 or 5 years. There's no one-party rules most of the time. The Labour Party can push forward policies, and I've covered it on numerous occasions, and they get shut down. They get voted down. There's no, let's try and do the best for the public. It's about, we're in power now. We're going to do whatever we want. Look at Boris Johnson. Has Boris Johnson put through policies to help the working class or the poor? No, of course not. Because he doesn't care about them. He's putting through policies and laws to enrich his friends and his colleagues and to make it easier for donors of the party to thrive. That's what it's all been about. How is the European Union facilitating that? I don't understand.
The British ruling class love the EU, as we saw in the referendum campaign, when even the Eurosceptical Tory party, the majority of its officials voted, or not just voted, campaigned for Remain. It's a well and truly establishment way of organising things.
Politicians generally vote whichever way their party wants them to vote. look at how the Conservative Party vote today. They're all Brexiteers. Does she honestly believe that these people truly believed in remaining in the EU and then suddenly became people who truly believed in leaving the EU? They're career politicians. They say, oh look, at the moment, most people want to stay in the European Union. Then let's go with that. Oh look, now most people want to, or at the time, most people want to leave the EU. Then let's go in that direction. Politicians don't have, most politicians don't actually have morals or a compass or any sort of inner policy that they truly believe in. They put their finger in the air and they say, okay, the wind is going in this direction, I follow that direction. The party is going in that direction, I'll go in that direction. But if you look at some of the, for a good example is the Work and Pensions Minister or Secretary. She's responsible for universal credit. And on every occasion in Parliament, she's voted against improving the lives of people on universal credit. Every time. Now, you think somebody who would be responsible for those people would look out for those people, but she doesn't. She cares about developing her career. So some politicians realized it was a benefit for them to be quote unquote Remainers. And then others saw it as an opportunity, others saw it as when it changed, to be quote unquote Brexiteers. Now, of course, there are some people who believe, like some politicians in the Conservative Party who truly believed in remaining in the European Union. And there's some politicians who truly believed in leaving the European Union. But the general politicians in between those two extremes always go with whichever way the party is going. In the same way with votes. There's which way is the party voting? I'll vote that way. They don't even read the bill, or they don't even read the law that they're voting on.
Things that evaded accountability to voters. And I think people understood that and they wanted that control back.
But they didn't get it.
So you can say they'll now all be disappointed. I think that first of all, they were disappointed that the vote wasn't going to happen. So we don't know. That 4 years was very important because it also revealed to people what they'd never understood before, that there were institutions that were not acting in their interest. As I say, it had a radicalizing impact. And of course, since we've left, we've had COVID. So that obviously doesn't help clarify for any of us where we've landed exactly. But I've never met a Leave voter who said, I'm voting to leave the European Union so that I'm going to get a wage increase.
If you ask them, they will say, because that wasn't sold to them. It was about freedom. It was abstract. Because, of course, if you ask somebody, did you vote to get a wage increase? They're not going to say that because they can't defend it. They will say, well, I voted to take back control, which indirectly will help me, improve my wages or whatever. But of course, she's right here that no one will admit that, yeah, I voted to increase my wages, because that isn't an argument you can actually try and even defend. Because the next question was, well, how? How will leaving the EU improve your wages? But they can try and defend things like freedom. Well, how will your freedom improve? Well, because we'll control our parliament. We won't be listening to unelected bureaucrats, apart from David Frost. We won't be listening to European unelected bureaucrats. It's easier to sell something that's abstract than something that's tangible. Because as soon as you try to sell the tangible thing, it falls apart. Now, I do recommend, this video has gone on much longer than I expected, so I do recommend watching the entire video. It's extremely, I didn't really come away with any benefit from this. It seems to be, on the right, the people voted to stop immigration. And on the left, it's some sort of taking back control and fighting the system, but not really fighting the system. Taking back control and fighting something. But the consequences have been that the people who you were fighting are actually stronger now. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?